Pay attention to Katie Sepik, 22 years old, walking alone down a deserted street in Las Cruces, New Mexico after midnight on August 31st, 2003. Her heart is still racing from the argument with her boyfriend. She has less than 1 hour left to live. Because Gabriel Avila, 23 years old, a predator with a criminal history, has already spotted her and circled back in his pickup truck. On this night, Katie just wanted to get home and forget the worst evening of her life. On this night, Avila was hunting for a victim who was alone and vulnerable. This is the story of one walk home that destroyed a family and changed criminal justice forever. Katie Sepik was the kind of young woman everyone loved to be around. The oldest of 3 siblings growing up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, she radiated the kind of energy that filled every room she entered. Her mother, Jalen, described her as straightforward, intelligent, and bursting with life. Katie wasn't just coasting through college, she was conquering it. She just graduated from New Mexico State University with a business degree. And that fall, she planned to dive into her MBA program. But Katie wasn't waiting around for success to find her. She worked hard, waiting tables at a local Mexican restaurant, saving money, and building the foundation for her future. Everyone who knew Katie saw the same qualities in her. She was outgoing, cheerful, the kind of person who made friendships feel effortless. Her smile was infectious, and her ambition was undeniable. Katie had plans. She had dreams. She had a boyfriend named Joe Bischoff who she believed was the one. They'd met during college, starting as friends before their connection deepened into something more serious. Katie confided in her mother that Joe was special, that he might be the person she'd spend her life with. Jalen remembered her daughter's excitement vividly. They'd even started talking about wedding plans, though Katie admitted it was probably too soon. But that was Katie. When she loved something, she dove in completely. Joe seemed like the perfect match for her daughter, Jalen thought. He came from a good family, intelligent and polite, and he'd spent time at their home in Carlsbad. The relationship felt solid, stable, promising. They'd even gone shopping together for a ring that Katie wore proudly at parties, showing it off to friends who squealed with excitement for her future. After graduating, Joe moved back to his hometown to work with his father in the family business. But over Labor Day weekend in 2003, he returned to Las Cruces to visit Katie and their circle of friends. It was supposed to be a celebration, a reunion filled with laughter, drinks, and memories. Instead, it became the last weekend Katie would ever see. Saturday night, August 30th, 2003. Katie was radiant as she went out with Joe and their friends for a night of bar hopping across Las Cruces. The group moved from venue to venue, drinks flowing, music pounding, the kind of carefree night college students live for. Eventually, they ended up at a house party, crammed with around 40 people, most of them familiar faces from their university days. The energy was high, the night felt endless. But beneath the surface, tension was building between Katie and Joe. Witnesses later told investigators that Katie had seen Joe kissing another girl at the party. Her anger was immediate and justified. Friends watched as the couple argued, voices rising, emotions boiling over. Katie, hurt and furious, made a decision. She grabbed her things, or at least she thought she did, and stormed out of the party alone. In her haste and heartbreak, she left behind her purse. Inside that purse were her house keys, her phone, and her connection to safety. She walked into the night without any of it, too upset to realize her mistake, until it was too late. The distance from the party house to Katie's home was just over a mile. A short walk, a safe neighborhood, nothing to worry about, she probably thought. But Katie Sepik had no idea that Gabriel Avila was in that neighborhood too. While his wife was away, Avila had driven to the area to buy drugs. And when he saw Katie walking alone in the darkness, something evil awakened inside him. He slowed his pickup truck and pulled up beside her, offering her a ride. Katie refused. She kept walking, determined to make it home on her own. Avila didn't push it. Not yet. He drove on, letting her think she was safe. But he was watching, waiting. On the morning of August 31st, 2003, Jalen Sepik was preparing for a Labor Day party at her home in Carlsbad. Friends were coming over to swim and barbecue. It was supposed to be a day of celebration and relaxation. But at around 2 in the afternoon, the phone rang. It was Tracy, Katie's roommate. Her voice was tight with panic. "Have you talked to Katie today?" Tracy asked. Jalen's heart sank. She and Katie spoke multiple times every single day. The answer was no. "We can't find her," Tracy said. "She never came home last night." Jalen felt ice flooding her veins. Tracy explained that she'd already called hospitals, checked with friends, searched everywhere she could think of. Nothing. Katie's father, Dave, had been at the store when the call came in. When he got home and heard the news, his instinct kicked in immediately. "I'm going to Las Cruces." He said, "I'll find her." But even as he said it, a terrible feeling settled in his chest. Something was very, very wrong. The family contacted the Las Cruces Police Department, filing a missing person report. Tracy explained that Katie had left the party upset and alone, and that she and Joe had fallen asleep at the party house, assuming Katie had made it home safely. But when morning came, Katie was nowhere to be found. At almost the exact same time the Sepich family was reporting Katie missing, a local resident made a horrifying discovery in the desert outside Las Cruces. Near an old landfill site, partially concealed by scrub brush, lay the body of a young woman. The resident immediately called 911. When investigators arrived at the remote location, they knew instantly this was no accident. The victim appeared to be in her early 20s. There was no identification on or near the body, but the evidence of foul play was undeniable. Detectives from the Las Cruces Police Department examined the scene with grim focus. The young woman had clearly fought for her life. The medical examiner would later confirm the violent nature of the attack. Forensic investigators collected critical evidence from the scene that would prove vital to the investigation. The evidence indicated this was a brutal assault, and the victim had fought her attacker with tremendous courage. The location of the body also told investigators an important story. The scene showed no signs of a struggle at this location. She hadn't been attacked here. She'd been killed somewhere else and then transported to this remote area. Tire tracks near the site suggested the vehicle used was likely a pickup truck based on the tread pattern. But that detail alone wasn't enough to narrow down the suspect pool. Pickup trucks were everywhere in New Mexico. Still, it was something. Investigators photographed the scene, collected every piece of physical evidence, and prepared to identify the victim. Dave Sepich was already on his way to Las Cruces when police contacted him. They needed someone to view the body at the morgue. He drove in silence, praying desperately that it wouldn't be Katie, even though deep down he already knew. When detectives showed him the victim, Dave's worst nightmare became reality. Years later, Jalen recalled her husband's return home that terrible night. Dave's face was ashen, his eyes hollow. He could barely speak. When he finally found the words, what he described broke Jalen's heart all over again. "When they showed me," Dave told her, his voice cracking, "the pain was so intense that I thought I wouldn't be able to take another breath." Jalen's own words echoed the agony of every parent's worst fear. No father should ever have to do that. Katie's death sent shockwaves through Las Cruces. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a nightmare come to life, in a community that prided itself on safety. Fear spread quickly. If this could happen to Katie Sepich, a smart, responsible young woman with everything to live for, it could happen to anyone. Jalen later said that all they wanted was to know who had done this and why. But more than anything, they wanted to stop him from destroying another family. "We wanted to know who had done this, who could have done this," she said, "and we wanted to stop him from doing it to others." The Las Cruces Police Department threw every available resource into the investigation. Detectives knew they were racing against time. Whoever killed Katie was still out there, free to strike again. And the evidence suggested he would. This wasn't a crime of passion or a tragic accident. This was calculated, violent, evil. The killer had attempted to destroy evidence at the scene. He'd stolen her rings, including the one Joe had given her, likely as trophies or to sell later. This was someone who knew what he was doing, someone who'd likely done it before, or would do it again. Investigators began reconstructing Katie's final hours, minute by minute. They interviewed everyone who'd been at the party that night, roughly 40 people who'd seen Katie before she disappeared. The story that emerged was consistent. Katie and Joe had argued after she caught him with another girl. Hurt and furious, Katie left the party without her belongings, walking home alone in the middle of the night. But here's where things got strange. When detectives first interviewed Joe Bischoff, he failed to mention the argument. He said Katie had simply left the party and he'd assumed she'd gone home. He didn't mention the fight. He didn't mention the other girl. Why? The distance from the party house to Katie's residence was just over a mile, a short walk through a residential neighborhood. Detectives went door to door along the route Katie would have taken, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual that night. No one had. But when they arrived at Katie's house, they found something crucial. Katie's shoes were lying in the yard directly outside her bedroom window. Evidence in the gravel showed signs of a struggle. The story became clear. Katie had made it home. Unable to get inside because she'd left her keys at the party, she'd tried to climb through her bedroom window. And that's when the killer attacked her. Joe became the primary focus of the investigation. His behavior raised red flags everywhere detectives looked. He'd initially omitted the argument with Katie during his first interview. When confronted by witnesses who contradicted his story, he changed his account, admitting they'd fought. He claimed he'd been calling and texting Katie throughout the night, worried about her. But investigators pointed out that Joe knew Katie had left her phone at the party. She couldn't have received any of those messages. So why the performance? Joe also said he and a friend had driven by Katie's house looking for her, but they didn't stop because her bedroom light was off. Why not knock on the door? Why not check? The inconsistencies piled up. Joe hired a lawyer almost immediately and refused to provide a DNA sample. For investigators, this looked like the behavior of a guilty man. The timeline fit. Joe had means, motive, and opportunity. He'd been with Katie that night. They'd argued. She'd left angry, and he'd stayed behind with the other girl. Maybe things had escalated later. Maybe Joe had followed Katie home, and things had spiraled out of control. Detectives needed his DNA to compare against forensic evidence collected at the scene. But Joe wasn't cooperating. He left Las Cruces immediately after Katie's body was discovered, returning to his hometown. After that first night of questioning, he refused to speak with investigators at all. But detectives had a plan. They remembered that Katie and Joe had been intimate before going to the party that night in Katie's bedroom. If Joe's DNA was present in Katie's home, they could collect it as part of the crime scene investigation. Forensic teams processed Katie's bedroom thoroughly. Lab results came back. They found evidence that could be analyzed. This was the moment of truth. Would it match the forensic profile from the crime scene? The answer came back within days. It didn't match. Joe Bischoff was not the killer. Eventually, Joe agreed to provide a direct DNA sample voluntarily. As expected, the results confirmed he wasn't involved in Katie's murder. When detectives pressed him about his earlier refusal to cooperate, Joe explained that he'd been terrified. He knew forensic evidence from their consensual relationship might be found. He feared that police would jump to conclusions and charge him with murder based on circumstantial evidence alone. His lawyer had advised him to stay silent until investigators could prove he wasn't involved. In retrospect, his behavior made sense, but it had cost the investigation valuable time, and it had left Katie's family tormented by suspicion and uncertainty about someone they'd welcomed into their home. Recorded interrogation footage captured the raw emotion of Joe Bischoff's interview with detectives. When investigators informed him of Katie's death, Joe's reaction was visceral. "I can't breathe," he said, gasping. "I need some air. What happened?" Detectives pressed him to recount the night's events. Joe admitted the truth. This time he'd been fooling around with his roommate's sister at the party. Katie saw it happen. "She got angry and left. That's the last time I saw her," Joe said, his voice breaking. "I drove by her house. The light wasn't on, so I didn't stop. I was really drunk. I didn't care." "Did you kill her?" the detective asked bluntly. "No, sir," Joe replied. "How did it happen?" the investigator pushed. "I don't know, sir," Joe said, tears streaming down his face. "I know nothing about it. I feel so bad. Katie was everything to me." The detective's response cut through the room like a blade. "If she was everything to you, why were you screwing around on her?" Joe had no good answer. "I get drunk. I'm stupid." The interrogation ended with Joe cleared as a suspect, but his reputation in ruins. He'd betrayed Katie, and though he hadn't killed her, he contributed to the circumstances that put her in danger that night. With Joe eliminated as a suspect, the investigation stalled. The tire tracks pointed to a pickup truck, but that was too vague to be useful. Katie's rings were missing, including the one from Joe, but they never surfaced at pawn shops or online marketplaces. The forensic evidence from the crime scene sat in a database, waiting for a match that might never come. Months passed. Then a year. Katie's family lived in agony, knowing the killer was out there, free to hurt someone else, and their worst fears nearly came true. In late 2004, about a year after Katie's murder, a similar attack occurred in Green Bay, Wisconsin. A young woman survived a violent assault by two men. She provided descriptions to police, and composite sketches were released to the public. A local farmer recognized them immediately. They were two of his laborers, Gregorio Morales and Juan Neo. Both men were arrested quickly. One of them had relatives in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Could these be the men who killed Katie? Hope surged through the investigation. But when their DNA was tested against the evidence from Katie's case, neither matched. The two men were eventually convicted for the Wisconsin attack and sentenced to 70 years and 50 years in prison, respectively. But they had nothing to do with Katie Sepich. The case remained unsolved for over 3 years. The only real hope was the forensic evidence. But there was a massive problem. One, that Katie's mother, Jalen, couldn't believe when she learned about it. In New Mexico, like in most states at that time, law enforcement could only collect DNA samples from convicted criminals after they'd been sentenced to prison. If someone was merely arrested for a violent crime, their DNA couldn't be taken and entered into the system until they were found guilty and imprisoned. This meant that Katie's killer could be arrested multiple times for other crimes, and unless he was convicted and sentenced to prison, his profile would never be tested. The detective told us that all they really had was the forensic evidence, Jalen recalled. Her response was immediate. Surely this monster will get arrested for something else sooner or later. Once they collect his DNA, they'll find him right away. The detective's answer crushed her. No, ma'am. In New Mexico and in most states, taking DNA at arrest is illegal. Jalen was shattered. How could the system be designed this way? How could the law protect criminals instead of victims? The answer made no sense to her. And it wouldn't make sense to thousands of other victims' families across the country who were fighting the same battle. Then, on December 18, 2006, more than 3 years after Katie's murder, the miracle happened. The New Mexico Crime Lab called with news that changed everything. They'd found a match. The forensic evidence from Katie's case matched a man named Gabriel Avila. He was 26 years old. He had a long criminal record stretching back years. And he'd been out of prison for only a short time when he murdered Katie. Most chillingly, Gabriel Avila didn't know Katie Sepich at all. She was a complete stranger. He'd simply seen her walking alone that night and decided to destroy her. Gabriel Avila's criminal history painted the portrait of a serial predator. Less than 3 months after he killed Katie on November 13, 2003, Avila broke into a home where 2 female college students lived. He was armed, intent on committing another violent assault. Fortunately, the women locked themselves in the bathroom and called 911. Police arrived in time to arrest Avila. He was charged with armed burglary with intent to commit a serious crime, a violent felony, but here's where the system failed catastrophically. Avila was released on bond while awaiting trial, and then he disappeared. He wasn't arrested again until November of 2004, over a year later. Only then was he finally sent back to prison. And only when he entered prison, not when he was arrested, not when he was charged, but when he was convicted and sentenced, was his DNA collected and entered into the system. Even then, it took nearly 2 more years for that sample to be processed and tested against the evidence in Katie's case. By the time the match was confirmed in December 2006, Gabriel Avila had already been in prison for 2 years. If DNA had been collected at his arrest in November 2003, just months after Katie's murder, he would have been identified as her killer immediately. When detectives confronted Avila in prison and showed him Katie's ring, which they'd recovered from his pickup truck, he confessed to everything. The story he told was as cold and calculated as the crime itself. On the night of August 30th, 2003, Avila had driven to Katie's neighborhood to buy drugs while his wife was away. He saw Katie walking alone and offered her a ride. She refused. He drove on, but he didn't forget her. Later, he saw her again, this time trying to climb through her bedroom window because she'd left her keys at the party. Avila stopped his truck and approached her. "Do you need any help?" he asked. Katie, frustrated and exhausted, admitted, "I can't get into the house because I forgot my bag." That was all the opening Avila needed. He attacked her viciously. Katie fought back with everything she had, defending herself with tremendous courage. But Avila overpowered her. The attack was brutal and fatal. She fought back, he told investigators, and then I couldn't stop. What happened next was pure evil, an attempt to destroy evidence and cover his tracks. Afterward, Avila loaded Katie's body into his pickup truck and drove out to the old landfill in the desert. He attempted to destroy evidence at the scene, hoping to make identification impossible. But his efforts failed, leaving behind the crucial forensic evidence that would eventually convict him. He stole her rings, including the one from Joe, as trophies or to sell. Then he drove home as if nothing had happened. For over 3 years, Gabriel Avila went about his life, knowing what he'd done, knowing he'd gotten away with it, until the day the DNA match came through. In 2006, thanks to the relentless advocacy of Katie's parents, Katie's Law was passed in New Mexico with overwhelming support. Only 5 votes opposed it. The law requires that DNA samples be collected from anyone arrested for a violent crime, not just after conviction. It was a groundbreaking change that would save countless lives in the years to come. By 2010, Katie's Law became the model for federal legislation. Today, over 31 states have adopted similar laws, allowing law enforcement to collect DNA at the time of arrest for violent offenses. In 2007, Gabriel Avila was sentenced to 69 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing, he apologized to Katie's family and begged for leniency. But Katie's father, Dave, stood before the court with a statement that captured the family's pain and resolve. "We will never see our daughter again in this lifetime," he said. "So the man who took her life should never be allowed to walk free again." The judge agreed. Jalen Sepich, Katie's mother, addressed the court as well. Her words were both heartbreaking and inspiring. "There is no such thing as closing the chapter on grief," she said. "But we have been healing and moving forward because we still have 2 wonderful children to live for. We have promised to keep fighting for Katie's Law to be adopted in all 50 states in honor of our daughter." Katie Sepich was 22 years old when she was murdered by a stranger outside her own home. She'd graduated with honors, dreamed of earning her MBA, and planned to marry the man she loved. She worked hard, loved deeply, and brought joy to everyone around her. Her life was stolen in a moment of unspeakable violence by a man who saw her as nothing more than an opportunity. But Katie's death sparked a movement that has changed criminal justice across America. Because of Katie's Law, forensic evidence collected at arrest has solved thousands of cold cases and prevented countless future crimes. Serial predators like Gabriel Avila can no longer hide behind legal technicalities that once protected them. The law that bears Katie's name is her legacy, a testament to a young woman whose life mattered and whose death demanded justice. Today, the Sepich family continues to advocate for DNA collection laws nationwide. They've turned their grief into action, their pain into purpose, and while nothing can bring Katie back, her impact on the world continues to grow. Pay attention to the names of the victims whose cases remain unsolved, because DNA laws haven't reached their states yet. Pay attention to the families still waiting for justice. And remember Katie Sepich, the 22-year-old graduate whose final 60 hours changed criminal justice forever.